Meet NBC Nightly News and Dateline NBC anchor Lester Holt next on a special edition of Carpe Diem. Hello, welcome to Carpe Diem. I'm Marc Rosenweig, Associate Professor in the School of Communication and Media at Montclair State University. Our guest is Lester Holt, anchor of NBC Nightly News and Dateline NBC. He's an award-winning journalist who joined NBC News 16 years ago. Recently, he returned from covering the death of Fidel Castro in Cuba. In 2016, he moderated the most-watched presidential debate in American history, viewed by 84 million people. He also covered Hurricane Matthew and the Rio Olympics. Prior to joining NBC News, he was an anchor at MSNBC and worked at television stations in New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. Lester is here today to receive the Alan B. Dumont Broadcaster of the Year Award from our school and to speak with students. And Lester, welcome to campus and congratulations on the award.
Thank you. I am delighted and honored. Great to be here.
Tell us how it all got started. How early did you know you were going to be in broadcast news?
I was probably in junior high. I had a brother who briefly worked in radio, and he took me to the radio station one day, and I thought I could do this. At that point, I was set on being a rock and roll disc jockey. My first on-air job was actually as a country and western disc jockey when I was in high school. I worked midnight to 6 on Saturday and Sundays. At the same time, I started hanging around the local TV station. This was in Sacramento, California. And went into college, continued to work at the radio station full-time, but at that point was doing some news as well as playing records, and then got an opportunity to move to the CBS-owned station in San Francisco, all-news radio station, and dropped out of college in my junior year, which I know parents right now are shuddering right now. Don't listen to him.
What did your parents say at the time?
You know, they were worried, that you won't be able to succeed. The plan was always to go back, but I got so involved in news. Within a year and a half, I was in New York City at 22, working at Channel 2 in New York, and things just kind of snowballed from there. I was in love with the business and loved being a reporter, and didn't look back.
You were anchor at WBBM in Chicago for 14 years, and then one day you're demoted. And that was a real test of your perseverance, right?
It really was. Up to that point, people say, "What do you learn about being demoted?" And I said, and this is talking to young people in the business. I said, you have to understand that your bosses are not your friend, and I think that's what I learned. Your bosses are friendly. They're part of your team, but it was a reminder that it's a business, and in the business, we weren't cutting it in the ratings. Whether that was the set, the graphics, the anchors, I don't know. But it was one of those gut check moments, and I had to decide, do I want to stay in this lesser role, or is this a wake-up call to try something different? And I decided to try something different, and except there wasn't anything out there. I was kind of scraping around looking for work, and then the MSNBC opportunity presented itself, and I thought, let me do national news. I can always go back and do local news. But I got to MSNBC in 2000, and it kicked off 5 incredible years of news. Later that year, we were involved in the recount, the Gore-Bush, the Florida recount, which was a huge story that certainly put me out there in a big way. Then, of course, there was 9/11, there was the invasion of Afghanistan, there was the invasion of Iraq. That was all within a 5-year period. So it was an incredible time to be a journalist in a cable news operation, and it really kind of set me up for the rest of my career.
And in 2000, because of your stamina, your work ethic, you kind of picked up during that recount, you picked up the nickname of Iron Pants, and that's kind of a badge of honor, correct?
It is. I still can't remember who gave me that nickname, but yeah, in cable news, you stay on the story and you keep going and going and going, and certainly the recount had me in the chair a long time. So I got the nickname Iron Pants. I never knew if that's because, you know, I was sitting in the chair a long time or because I didn't have to go to the bathroom for many hours. I'm not sure which it was. You know, I've always had a very strong work ethic. When something is going on, I want to be there. I want to be a part of it. And like I said, that was an incredible period to be in cable news.
Now, preparation is also important. It's one of the keys to your success. And you're at NBC for over a decade. You're doing Weekend Today, you're doing Weekend Nightly News, and so on. And an opening occurs on the NBC Nightly News when Brian Williams leaves after some controversies and so on. You were prepared, you were ready. That made a difference because you might have, a lesser person might have been discouraged and said, I'm doing great, but I'm not at the top rung. But you hung in there, so to speak.
Well, you know, one of the things I've always, when I talk to young people who want to get in this business and they ask advice, I tell them, I say, you want to be the Swiss Army knife of the organization. They kind of look at me and I'm like, you want to be able to do everything. The light stories, the hard stories, you know, the breaking stories, anchoring, whatever it is. And that is really kind of how I have fashioned my career. And so when opportunities presented themselves out of the blue, which they have on a number of times in my career, I wanted to be standing there. I wanted, you know, to be someone to look and go, you're the guy. You know, things happen in very odd ways, and I said it's happened a number of times in my career, but all you can do is be ready for doors to open. You never know when they're going to open or why they're going to open, but, you know, if you prepare yourself, you can be ready.
What about the fact that you're the first African American to host a weeknight broadcast news program? What comes with that? What are your thoughts about it? What are the responsibilities and so on?
Well, a lot of thoughts go through my mind. Obviously, that a lot was made of that. Part of me was like, wow, it's 2000, you know, at the time it was 2015. I mean, are we still in that period of the first this, the first that? But at the same time, I recognize that, you know, this is a job that has not been held in terms of a solo anchor by an African American. And I immediately think back of those who opened the doors, Max Robinson and many others who opened these doors so that, you know, someone like me could take the job. At the same time, I remind folks, it's not like there was a sign out that said African Americans need not apply. There just aren't that many of these jobs, only a handful of them. And in my case, they were all held by people about my same age. So it was really something that I'd kind of put aside, that it, you know, it wasn't going to happen in my career, and that was fine. I had as you've said, I had a great series of jobs at NBC. I was quite happy, and obviously didn't see this coming. But I've embraced the role and truly enjoying it. It's been a challenging time, certainly, to be the lead anchor, but it's been enjoyable.
Well, let's talk about that. It's been a big year to be the lead anchor or to be in journalism in general. You moderated the first presidential debate, viewed by 84 million people. What was the preparation like for that event?
The preparation was quite intense. You know, several weeks out, we formed, you know, let me back up. The way it works is it's the Commission on Presidential Debates, a nonprofit organization. They put this together. When I was out there on the stage, I was on my own, but I was allowed to have my own team for preparation. So I had my NBC colleagues, and we set up question teams, you know, fact-checking teams. We would meet every day because, of course, what was the story today would be different the next day. So we would meet every day, you know, go over, you know, what we should be asking about, trying to figure the topic areas. We eventually worked into mock debates, which we held in the Seth Meyers studio on some
played
weekend.
Donald Trump?
I'd rather not say
right.
who played. I don't want to put anybody in a funny position, but
okay.
I will say that the people who played the candidates were spot on. In fact, there was one moment during the debate that I asked a question. The answer came back, but it wasn't really the answer, and I kept pushing. The entire exchange was almost word for word and one we had a few days earlier. I almost wanted to stop. Excuse me a second. Are you guys watching this? It's just like we rehearsed it. It was very strange, but it was great preparation, and it was tough. I mean, in an era of in which hacking is a risk and that sort of thing. We did everything the old-fashioned way. We said we were preparing like 1982, so it was a lot of handwritten stuff, a lot of stuff going in the shredder. It was challenging, but it was exhilarating, and I couldn't have been prouder of my team and the energy and the time they put into it. I mean, when I walked out there, I felt prepared, at least with the information. I wasn't necessarily prepared for the level of the exchange, and I had,
Well, I was going to ask you about that. How do you know, and how, going in there, you talk about the preparation, how did you decide when you should jump in as a moderator to correct a fact or, to seek clarification?
Well, it was fun reading Twitter afterward. Actually, I don't mean that. It's never fun to read Twitter these days, but it was interesting to read Twitter, and people said, he disappeared for a while. I went in with the idea that this is what America's been waiting for. They want to hear from these two people, and I'm going to give them space. This is not about me. My job is try to move it along, try to get to the unanswered questions, and so I try to give them as much space as possible. They took it and then some. It took me a few moments to get up to speed as to where they are. No one could predict how they would come out that day, but they came out ready to rumble, as the saying goes. But I really, really wanted people to hear from them, and I think we did.
What's your view of the media coverage of this campaign we just got through? What are the pluses and minuses?
There's been a lot of hand-wringing. We should have done this. We should have done that. Well, first of all, I with regard to the polls, I point out to people that we're not in the job of predicting wins or losses. The polls are a useful tool in what we do as a conversation point. And the fact is, if you look at where things stand right now in the popular vote, those polls were pretty close to accurate. I think Hillary Clinton's now leading by 2.5 million right now. So that's right there in the margin of error. The state polls were off, but that aside, the most important thing is that people came out and voted that Tuesday, and that was the ultimate poll. So whether we got it right or got it wrong in the days leading up to, I think has been a bit overblown. I think there is a lot of soul searching going on, but I'm one of those that I'm trying to be a voice of, hey, buck up here. We are the mainstream media. That's become a negative term. I say own it. Our job is to ask tough questions. Our job is to sometimes make you uncomfortable, to sometimes challenge your worldview, and we can't be apologetic about that. It's a popularity contest in as much as, ratings and newspaper subscriptions are obviously an important part of the business model, but I believe that there's been a little too much hand-wringing. And I look back at how we, certainly as an organization, covered this election, and I feel good about it. There was a candidate, let's face it, who went places that no other candidate has ever gone before. That, by its very definition, is news. And and we covered those things, and they were coming at us sometimes on a daily basis. There were people willing to point the finger of bias when we would do these stories, and I reject it. I think we the story played itself out, and we had to be on top of it.
Now, speaking of that candidate, you and a number of other journalists had an off-the-record meeting with Donald Trump a few weeks ago. Based on that, based on what the situation is right now, what are your expectations for media coverage of the Trump administration?
Well, I mean, it was off the record. Certainly, it's been widely reported of the tone of the meeting. But I will say it's this election. In many ways, I think the media was on the ballot. I think there is, among some, an active effort to delegitimize the media, and that's a frightening development that people should be very worried about. Our job as journalists is to shine the light in dark places, to hold people in power accountable, and we have to be able to do that. And to the extent that there are people in power now trying to delegitimize us, trying to lessen our role, trying to work around us, and it certainly began before this election, but it's become a much bigger thing right now. That's a real worry. The society needs an independent press that's not afraid to ask tough questions. As I said, not afraid to offend people, with the truth or the pursuit of the truth.
You mentioned fake news in relation to the election and so on. How concerned should we be about that at this point, and what, if anything, can be done about it?
Horribly concerned. There's a lot of, I heard this, well, I heard that. Well, where did you hear it? You know, as a mainstream news organization, you know, we can't just, we heard that. You know, we fact check. We, you know, do we have two sources on that? We go through that process. That's, you know, it's part of basic journalism. Unfortunately, we're in a period that, I keep hearing the term media. Well, we're all the media because we all have smartphones. We all have access to social media. We all have the ability to report. The question is what differentiates us in our sense of responsibility. You know, we get beat all the time on stories because we take the moment to take a deep breath. Is it the truth? What do we know about it? What do we not know about it? But not everyone is living by that same measure. At the same time, there is almost a tendency to seek out news that confirms your worldview. And we don't work that way. You can find any number of outlets online or, you know, certainly in the broadcast or cable world that will present you, make you feel comfortable with your worldview, but it's not necessarily, you know, the cold hard facts, or it doesn't have the full scope of balance and perspective.
What's your approach to your use of social media? It seems to be more of the moderate level. Is that intentional, or?
You know, social media and I have a tough relationship. It is a useful reporting tool. I've used it a couple of times during breaking news when I was out on my own. The bombings in Chelsea in New York that happened to be in my neighborhood, and you know, I was on social media reporting that. I was at Los Angeles airport when they had a terror scare and we were all rushed out onto the tarmac. So it's very useful in that respect. It's useful in promotion. But I'm going in less and less and reading less and less now because it has become such a poisonous environment. You know, you know, many of us, we could tweet, oh, beautiful sunny day in New Jersey today, and the response will be, yeah, well, if you're looking through your liberal rose glasses, you know, it's silly stuff, but it's unproductive and it's poisonous, and it's sad because it has such a potential to be an important device in terms of how we can communicate and create conversation. But this is my personal experience. It seems to be more of a conversation ender any more than it is a conversation starter.
I want to ask you about a few of the stories that you have covered, especially recently with the Olympics. What were the challenges in covering that? We have a situation in Brazil with the Zika virus, poverty and pollution and so on, the Ryan Lochte story. What was that coverage like for you?
Well, first of all, I will say a lot of us who covered the Olympics were welcome that it came when it did, because we were in the middle of a pretty ferocious election cycle, and it was like, 3 weeks, we can go away someplace really nice, celebrate, you know, these great athletes, not just American athletes, but athletes in general. They're great backstories. And so we all kind of went in with that feeling. And I think in that respect, it was great. There's always unexpected stories. The Lochte story was, you know, took everybody by storm, and obviously got a lot of coverage. In terms of the Zika thing, you know, whenever we go abroad, part of our job is to understand the risks, and we were made aware of those risks. Fortunately, I don't think anyone contracted Zika during the Olympics, athletes, media, or spectators. But, you know, I don't think folks realize how much goes into when we travel, especially to a conflict zone, you know, war zone, of the preparation we go through in terms of, you know, our own safety, and some things I can't talk about, but there's a lot that goes into it.
On the Lochte story, was part of it perhaps that the media was too willing to accept what he was saying at face value because of the image of Brazil that was presented? Well,
I mean, we all were aware of the image, but you know, here he was, an athlete, you know, speaking on camera about this experience, and you know, it was a case of maybe there was a reason not to discount it. I mean, I think that ultimately the story came out. You know, it was a hard one because there was language involved, language barriers, there was a videotape, and you know, it left people with different impressions. But you know, it was a story that couldn't be ignored, and it wasn't like it came third hand; it came straight from him.
You're going to go to Pearl Harbor soon for the 75th anniversary. What kind of preparation do you do for that? What kind of coverage do you do? And and the same thing really talking about Castro and Cuba, because in a way, because of all the things that are going on, you're not on the scene for that long. So how do you make an impact as an
Well,
anchor reporter?
in terms of the death of Castro, that's one obviously we have been prepared for. I mean, I don't think it's a secret in our business that we're aware of people's age and their stature in the world, and we have some pre-preparation for when they ultimately die. That story shifted, of course, and that he's been out of power for many years. But that one, we pretty much knew how things would play out, and so we were kind of always prepared for that. Things like Pearl Harbor, it's an anniversary, 75th anniversary, but we recognize that many of the survivors who will be there, this will be the last major anniversary they will be at. And I look at that, we talk about pivotal moments in American history, and people talk about Pearl Harbor and 9/11 in the same breath. And many of us, many years from now, will maybe be around for the 75th anniversary of, probably not me, but of 9/11, and it'll be, it's one of those things that reflects America and where it was and the things that changed it.
And your colleague Tom Brokaw has been heavily involved in writing and reporting on that, and that certainly adds another element to your coverage.
Yeah,
as well.
and I sat down. Tom is not able to make the trip, but we sat down on the Intrepid the other day, and of course he wrote the wonderful book, The Greatest Generation, and he told me that the greatest generation was really born there in Pearl Harbor, and the can-do spirit. I mean, you think of after that moment what the country went through in terms of building up a weakened military and building ships and airplanes and the support of the home front, how it changed the country.
Who are your mentors? Who are the people who've had the most influence on your career and on your life?
Well, one of them is the late Jerry Nachman. Jerry was a hard-charging New York reporter. He worked in radio and TV and newspapers, and Jerry was the guy that hired me in San Francisco. He had gone out to San Francisco to run the radio station there. I applied for a job, and I always remember that the interview was basically me listening to him tell his stories. I used to joke with him about that, but he hired me. And then he introduced me to the folks in New York, and 22, I was on the air here in New York City. So he was a great role model who taught me a lot about breaking news, and he fired me up about.
I remember
this
when
business.
he was on the air here.
Yeah, and
then he
then he ran Channel 4 in New York, and he was editor at the New York Post. He was quite the character, but he was one of those people who saw something in me when I was, very young and still making a lot of mistakes. But he saw something in me and gave me some great pushes along the way.
Your son is in this industry, Stephon Holt, and he's anchor at WNBC. When he was a kid, did you think he was going to follow in your footsteps?
Well, I knew he was always very interested in current events. He liked to come down to the station. When I moved to New York, he liked to come down to, when I would do the Today Show on weekends, he would come down and hang around. He never quite articulated he wanted to do that. He kept talking about studying political science, but he went out to the West Coast to college and got involved in a radio TV program, much like what you have here, and really started to take off. And for students coming of age in this digital era, it's a lot easier to get your stuff seen because it's you can post it online. And I remember looking at some of his stuff, and there's the father, and then there's the newsman. The newsman saw some great potential there, and I said, look, I can't get you a job. I said, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to send a couple notes to people I know and say, news directors, and say, keep an eye on this kid. He ain't ready yet, but someday he will be, and just be aware of him. And one of the guys did, and he ended up starting a station in Florida. But then one of the people I'd contacted, who'd watched him for a couple of years in Chicago, ultimately hired him, and he's kind of making his own way now.
Well, I think looking at you, he knew he had to pay his dues, right? And,
well, yeah. I mean, he's unfortunately, for better or worse, he's saddled with the Holt work ethic. I mean, he understands that nothing comes easy. I tell people all the time, you've got to earn this every day. I mean, every day we come in the newsroom, you've got to bring it. There's no, you can't have a down day. We're in a very competitive environment. we like to win, not only in the ratings, but I mean, I'm talking about just be able to put the newscast side by side and then we beat them on that. And that only comes if you come to work ready to play every day.
Now, you and your son like aviation, right? I read that somewhere.
Yeah, I grew up in Air Force bases. My father was in the Air Force, and he was also a private pilot. My brother was a military and airline pilot. My wife was a flight attendant. My father-in-law worked for Boeing. All this, me, I never learned. I never learned how to fly, but I've always liked covering aviation. I've always been enthralled by airplanes. So when I was in Chicago, I did a lot of aviation reporting, and I still, they still call me up sometimes on MSNBC if something happens to sit in as a little bit of an aviation, not quite an expert, but someone who knows a little something about it.
But your son does fly, right?
Yeah, he's a private pilot. Yeah, he flies out of New Jersey here.
Wow, we'll look for you guys up there
Okay.
really soon. I wanted to ask you also about your music career, because I understand you play the bass. I understand one of your former colleagues, is our colleague here, Marc Efron, says that occasionally you would strum a little bit of that bass in the office. What kind of release? What do you enjoy about the music?
Well, I've started playing bass when I was in junior high school, the electric bass, and I also play the upright bass. I love jazz. I used to sit in on jazz sets in some of the clubs in New York with friends. Right now, I'm part of a rock band at NBC with some friends. We call ourselves the 30 Rockers. We're doing rock and roll covers. We're having fun, and then I do have basses in my office. I always tell people that, especially when you're in a high demand job like this, you need to have something else in your life. I never want this job to define who I am. I enjoy this job, but this is not who I am, and it's nice to have something else that you can turn this off, and that's what music is for me. When I'm with my music friends, I'm not Lester the TV guy. I'm just Lester the bass player, and it is a great release to have something else that you can do. And sometimes on a long day in my office, I will shut the door and I'll crank on the amp. And
So it's true. He told me the truth about that.
Yeah. I think a lot of people think someone's got a loud subwoofer in the building, but no, it's usually me.
Favorite groups?
Oh, my Earth, Wind and Fire.
Yeah.
Earth, Wind and Fire. I got a chance to play with them one time doing a story during the sound check, and they said, "Do you want to play?" I'm like, "Really?" So that was a great moment.
That's terrific. Well, Lester, thank you for being with us today. It's really a pleasure, and congratulations on the award. And you're going to speak to our students at colloquium shortly.
Thank you. It's great to be here. It really is.
Thank you so much. And thank you for joining us. For more information on this or any edition of Carpe Diem, contact us at carpediem@mail.montclair.edu or call 973-655-5158. I'm Marc Rosenweig. For all of us at Montclair State University, thanks for joining Carpe Diem.